Hello everyone, this is CJ with Cyclotron. Well, I didn't really set out to make such a provocative video here today, but that's how it turned out. The original iteration for this video was me going to be telling you how you could still buy a brand new Harley Davidson motorcycle, particularly a popular model like a Lowrider S or Lowrider ST, for MSRP or close to it. I had to scrap that pretty quickly because there are a few remaining MSRP Harley dealers out there, but they're few and far between. I wasn't planning on mentioning names, but I'll go ahead and do it. For my research for this video, I ended up calling Laidlaw's in Southern California because I heard they're an MSRP dealer, and they are, from what they told me on the phone. I called a couple of dealers here in the Midwest when it was 15 degrees with snow on the ground. People I called were near the St. Louis area. Of course, I'm dealing with my local dealer. All fun and games, you know, basically $5,000 over MSRP when you get all their BS fees added in there, plus the Harley surcharge. There is a dealer in Topeka. Last I checked, they're pretty much MSRP with a few $100s over for the paperwork. I mean, check all this out for yourself. If you're an MSRP dealer or you've dealt with one, please give them credit and mention who they are in the comments section. Because what I'm finding is you're running the gauntlet with mostly the multi-store dealerships where they're going to jack you on financing. They won't give you a price over the phone. You're going to have to come down and hash it out, the fun and games. 3-card Monty. So here we go. The other idea I had after abandoning that original video idea was to examine the question in really open fashion as to whether Harley Davidson has abandoned or betrayed their core customer. And couldn't get through that one either because they clearly have. And I'm going to explain why. I'm going to show economic data, sales data, income data. I'm going to break it all down for you. You know, Harley Davidson has really branded themselves as a company making their motorcycles for mostly blue-collar people. People who have factory jobs, people who work construction. You know, I know some people with those types of jobs, they make over $200,000 a year. But I went to ZipRecruiter. They indicate that the national average annual pay for someone with a blue-collar job is $45,000 a year. So Harley's promise, in so many words, to these customers is that they'll sell you an American-made motorcycle, a motorcycle that you could probably largely work on yourself. It'll be assembled in the United States with parts from the United States. And there's been too many bites at that apple to erode what was the original promise by Harley Davidson. I'll say right off the start, I'm not a core Harley customer. I tried to buy my first Harley in 1987 when demand was real high, just like now, really. MSRP for an 883 iron, as I recall, in 1987 was around $4,000. They wanted to sell it for $5,000. They had no interest in taking my Yamaha Virago as trade. They said, we don't deal with that. You figure out how to sell it. So I was like, yeah, screw you guys. I didn't even try and buy my first Harley till another 30 years after that. In between, I owned dozens and dozens of Japanese and Italian motorcycles. But their core customers stuck with Harley. They kept buying motorcycles that were really expensive, certainly less reliable with less performance over the years, but they stuck with them. So Harley owes these people. Now you could give them a pass maybe that the Harley Davidson manufactured in the United States or really assembled in the United States has 30-40+% foreign parts content. You know, they don't like to advertise that. My restoration of my Roadster, a project I got mostly for my boys, took months. The last bit of parts just came in 7-8 months after I ordered it, and that was the fork reflectors. Came from India. So, you know, with supply chain issues and everything else, these chickens are coming home to roost. Harley can't really sweep it under the rug that the stuff is made in the USA. You know, they closed a factory in Kansas City in 2019 and opened up an assembly plant in Thailand. Now you could say they did that because of the realities of European tariffs, but you know, there's a difference between $15 a day pay in Thailand versus $25 an hour in Kansas City. So what's the other thing a traditional customer is looking for a Harley Davidson? They like a V-twin air-cooled motorcycle with that classic sound and looks of a Harley Davidson. Now, Harley's introduced the Sportster S and the Pan America liquid-cooled models. They don't look or sound much like a traditional Harley. I think that's okay. I think the Pan America is actually probably the best motorcycle they've ever made in terms of performance and functionality. And they still make the air-cooled models. But to some people, they think, you know, Harley may be turning their back, that they may be going all in on that. I think you got to give them a pass on that one. The other promise, as it were, is that people could work on their own bikes. That's getting harder to do with emission control equipment, safety equipment like ABS. So things are much more computerized now. I think you could give them a pass on that one too. But what you can't give them a pass on is how unaffordable Harley Davidsons are these days. Now, I did a video well over a year ago pointing out that the retail price adjusted for inflation for most Harley models is actually lower than it was several years ago. Some other YouTubers have picked up on that fact, but I've been talking about it for a long time. So it's not the price that's the problem. And people know in their gut that it's just prohibitive to buy a Harley in many cases now, particularly a new Harley. And I'm going to tell you exactly why this is. So let's just run through the numbers. Here's this one chart that I've got here, which is the original MSRP. And I decided to compare two really iconic vehicles, a Harley Davidson Street Glide and a Ford F-150 4x2 base model. And you can see going back to 2006, they're priced about the same, around $20,000. Street Glide's around $18,000, the F-150's around $20,000. And then over time, those prices have crept up. But now look at the chart with those MSRP prices adjusted for inflation. The Street Glide's actually gone down in price over the years, whereas the F-150 price has trended up. Let's look at current retail value. Looking pretty good there. In fact, you see the divergence around 2018 model years and to now, where the current value is actually higher than the original MSRP adjusted for inflation. And we know that's because of the whole supply chain thing and difficulty getting new vehicles, which has increased the demand greatly for used vehicles. So here's a combined chart of MSRP and current value. And let's look at this depreciation chart. You can see going back to 2006, a 2006 F-150 has lost over 75% of its value, whereas the Street Glide's lost about 60% of its value. For the last few model years, they're actually worth more than the MSRP, so it's negative depreciation, if you will. I just said Harleys are largely unaffordable now for many people. So if they're cheaper, then why is that the case? Well, the main thing is people buy trucks like they do cars for basic transportation, to work construction, to work farm jobs. It's a need, it's not necessarily a want. A Harley Davidson motorcycle is almost in every case a want. Now there's things Harley could do to make some models more affordable, lower cost. They don't have to load them up with every gadget. They can manufacture them a little cheaper. They could just offer a couple models that appeal to a newer rider, a younger rider, or people who are making the $45,000 a year, which according to ZipRecruiter is the average pay of a blue-collar worker in this country. Now, I know plenty of blue-collar workers are making over $200,000 a year, but according to ZipRecruiter, this is the average. So I went to this government report that just came out talking about income inequality. So what this chart shows is a couple things, that mostly people in the bottom 40% of income in this country really got hammered after the 2008 recession. Their incomes really didn't go much up at all relative to the people in the top 40% and particularly the top 20% of income in this country. So looking at this chart, an average blue-collar salary of $45,000 a year puts that person in the bottom 40% of income in this country. So the other thing that's happened since the last recession is that people have had to finance their basic needs to a far greater extent than they had in the past. Auto debt has doubled from $600 billion to $1.2 trillion during this time period. Today, over 85% of new cars are financed and over half of used cars are financed. Harley's gotten in on the act where half their income nowadays comes from their finance division. Over 2/3 of new Harleys are financed these days. And they're doing things like signing people up for high interest rates, 10+%, 7-8 year payment terms. They're whamming people. Repossessions have gone up on Harleys from $10 million worth of motorcycles to over $20 million of motorcycles today. So with this resurgence in motorcycle demand, what's happened? You take a great motorcycle like a Lowrider S or Lowrider ST. I actually love the Lowrider S. I think it's a fantastic bike. So I did some research. I called a few dealers across the country. I called some in the Midwest when it was 15 degrees outside with snow on the ground. I called a dealer in St. Louis, another up in Iowa. They wanted $23,000 or more for a bike that retails for $18,000. And that's not including sales tax. I heard from some people that Laidlaw's in Southern California is an MSRP dealer. I called to check it out, and it's legit. Laidlaw's, it turns out, based on my conversation with them, is a MSRP dealer. So they'll only charge MSRP and the fees that Harley charges them, which is full sticker and the delivery charge, and that's it. There's no dock fee. Well, I guess they'll have to charge the Harley surcharge, since they've added anywhere from $500 to $1,000 to the price of a new bike instead of adding it directly to the MSRP. They've got a little footnote where they're hitting you with the surcharge. Good luck trying to find an MSRP dealer. And I'm pretty interested, or I was, in the Lowrider S. I was asking Laidlaw's, I could just pay cash and have you send it out to me. Oh, no, we can't do that. Okay, I'll buy it and come pick it up. Oh, no, we know you're out of state now, and we can't do that. We'll get in trouble with Harley for selling bikes out of state. So it's like, I'm thinking to myself, let me get this straight. You can have dealers around me sell for 25% over MSRP, not including sales tax, for their dealer surcharge and their outrageous dock fees and their setup fee, which Harley actually reimburses them for, and whatever other fee they want to put in there. I mean, I had one of these dealers tell me that the Harley surcharge was $1,500. I told him, no, you go to the website, it ranges from $500 for a Sportster to $1,000 for a CVO. There's no $1,500 surcharge. Oh, that's what they told me because they're having a hard time getting metal to make the frames of the motorcycles. It's like, it's just another shell to hide the P under. Harley has no problem with that. They have no problem with dealers roping people in who really can't afford to buy a motorcycle with high interest rates, extended payment terms, the whole nine, and all these added fees that they're going to be upside down on the bike the instant they leave the dealership. And they're probably going to be upside down on the bike the entire time they're paying on them. Don't ever let a dealer sell for MSRP anywhere else in the country, even though there's things like the internet and third-party shipping and ambitious customers who are willing to drive across the country to go pick it up. Forget all that. Harley, they can control their dealers. They just choose not to when it comes to letting people gouge their customers. So Harley's decided to add salt to the wound of motorcycle affordability for their core customers by deciding they now want to be a luxury brand. Jochen Zeitz, a German-born CEO who turned Puma around and turned them into a luxury brand. And, I have no issue with him being from Germany. But the fact is, he's not really steeped in the culture of selling bikes in the United States. And that's what the board wants. That's what the stockholders want. They want maximum profit. They don't care that there's been years and years or decades of implicit promise to their core customers about what it means to buy a Harley and the Harley experience. No. So, Harley wants to be a luxury brand. Jochen Zeitz has stated that a number of times. But guess what? They're a wannabe luxury brand. Let's compare them to a true luxury brand like Rolex watches. Rolex, especially the sport model watches, have had huge increases in demand over the last 3 or 4 years. And it's just phenomenal. But they're still holding to a total production of about 800,000 watches worldwide each year. What that means is that if you want a Rolex, you better have a good relationship with a local dealer. Chances are you'll need to have bought Rolexes in the past. They need to know you. You're not going to be able to call a dealer across the country and get them to sell you a Rolex. You're going to have to get on a waiting list. And it may take a couple of years, but when the watch comes in, they'll call you and say, hey, we've got your Daytona in here. You want to come pick it up? You're going to pay retail $12,500. Now, there are people who don't hang on to those watches. They decide to flip them on the secondary market. Rolex doesn't like that, and when they figure it out, they'll probably never sell you another Rolex. But what happens is people are flipping those for 2 to 3 times what they paid for them. Now, Rolex doesn't let their dealers add surcharges. Rolex doesn't add surcharges. They don't let their dealers sell the watches online. So what happens is a watch shows up, the local dealer sells it to somebody on their list, or they make a phone call to a preferred customer and say, hey, we got this watch, you want to come get it? And they pay full retail, and that's it. But now Harley's got their surcharge, they've got their dealers adding surcharges. They want you to put down, huge deposits so that when the bike comes in, then you get the privilege of paying full MSRP plus. It's a short-term strategy. Rolex gets it. They could up their production, but in a few years when demand cools, and it will, every product goes through cycles. There's ups and downs, and it's going to happen with motorcycles. This crazy time will pass. This crazy time for Rolex will pass, but they won't have up production to the extent that it's going to crash the value of the used watches. It's not going to result in an oversupply of new watches that have to be discounted later. So what's Harley doing? They're just in it for short-term maximum profit. Why can't they do what Rolex does? Hey, Joe Blow, you want a lowrider ST? We know you've bought 10 other Harleys over the last 30 years. We'll add your name to the list, and when it comes in, it's yours. You're paying full sticker, and that's it. Or, the Rolex authorized dealers have some discretion. If somebody has a compelling story, maybe they're a younger customer and have years and years of potential Rolex purchases ahead of them. They may see fit to sell that person the Rolex at MSRP. Harley's wrapped themselves in the American flag and images of the American Eagle to sell motorcycles for decades. Have you ever heard of them reserving a hot model for somebody who just returned from an active duty deployment? Why couldn't they do something like that? It's because they want to make every last dollar that they can from people who are financing a bike up to their eyeballs in debt, or the people who are in the top 20% income bracket. Everybody else can go pound sand. Now, don't get me wrong, if you're one of these people who are okay paying over 25% MSRP to get the hot new Harley model, by all means, it's an emotional purchase. It's a want, it's not a need, it's your money. But if you don't have that kind of money and you've been a loyal customer and you still want the bike, you're just out of luck. So I have nothing but contempt for companies that profiteer in this fashion. People who gouge their long-standing customers. And it just doesn't sit right with me at all. And, we don't need the government coming in. I kind of sometimes wonder if Harley's opening themselves up to class action lawsuits. Some attorneys could get together and realize that there may be a class action case for how they gouge customers, how they conduct their financing practices. I'm not advocating for that either. But the worm will turn. This market will cool. The people who ponied up an extra 25% over MSRP to buy the hot new bike, there'll be another hot bike that they want in 3 years. And guess what? They're so upside down on the bike that they just bought this year, they'll have no chance of getting that newer bike, even with the most creative financing in the world, because everything has its limits. So eventually, the established customer will age out, they'll tap out on finances, and so they'll sell to a smaller and smaller base of customers consisting of the top 20% of income earners in this country. That's their legacy. And, you could speculate why that is, but it's a fact. So please let me know what you think in the comments section. Again, if you know of some straight shooter, transparent, MSRP or close to MSRP Harley dealers, tell me about it in the comments section for this video. Let's get the word out. I mean, left on your own, it's going to take a lot of work to figure out where these MSRP dealers are. And if they're not in your local area, you may have a hard time getting one of these guys to sell you a bike at MSRP if you're from not around there. So that's it for today. If you like this content, please hit the subscribe button and please leave your comments and watch out for future videos. Thanks very much.